Welcome to Planning for the Unforeseen. A lot of you may be wondering, what is planning for the unforeseen? So this means preparing for future financial decisions today, which can sometimes be an uncomfortable part of the financial planning process. Something that we talked about as we were preparing for this particular webinar was the Day of the Dead holiday. So this is a Mexican holiday. It was celebrated just last week, where people celebrate the lives of deceased loved ones. And since we're going to be talking about some difficult topics today related to death, we want you to remember that planning for the unforeseen is about making your loved ones' lives easier if something happens to you. This is going to be a little more somber webinar than we normally do, just because it's a sensitive topic. And it was kind of a challenge for me to put together the webinar slides compared to most of the other ones that we do, because it is such a challenging topic and we wanted to do a good job of it. So my name is Andrea Pellegrini, and I am the Assistant Director in University Student Financial Services and Cashier Operations, and I run the Student Money Management Center for the entire University of Illinois system. So today I'm in Urbana, but sometimes I'm in Chicago and sometimes I'm in Springfield, and I help provide financial education primarily to college students at all of those universities in the system, in Urbana, Chicago, and Springfield, obviously, in lots of different ways. So we do webinars, we do individual coaching sessions, we do workshops, we have an e-newsletter that goes out to students, parents, and staff and faculty. So we do all kinds of things. I'm sure I'm missing a whole bunch of stuff that we do. And I'm presenting today with my friend Seisha. Seisha, you want to talk about what you do and your role?
Hello, my name is Seisha Grobinstetter, and I work for the University of Illinois Extension. I'm a consumer economics educator, so basically what that means, instead of teaching at a university, I teach my community, which is Grundy, Kankakee, and Will counties. I get to do all sorts of cool things like teach inmates or do online webinars or even do podcasts. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic today.
Thank you, Seisha. So since we're doing this as a statewide kind of thing, we've partnered with lots of other institutions across the state, like North Park University and Columbia College in Chicago. We have lots of other facilitators that are helping us across the state to promote this. We kind of want to know what state and or county that you're logging in from today. We've also done some national promotion as well. So we just want to make sure that we're hitting all the places that we're trying to promote. So let us know in the chat where you're logging in from today. Oh, Champaign, Vermilion County, Frankfort, Illinois, Rochester, Minnesota, hitting up that, Texas. That's awesome. I love it. Woodstock, okay, lots of different places, including other states. So we're going to be talking about these learning objectives. These are 4 main learning objectives for today. We're going to talk about identifying unforeseen situations that you can plan for while you're still alive, defining estate planning in any related terms that might be unfamiliar to people. We're going to try to understand some tools and considerations for planning ahead for those kinds of unforeseen situations. And then we're going to describe how to start having those delicate estate planning conversations with the people that you love. So we're going to use that chat function again, because like I said, it's our favorite. What are some things that you think are unforeseen, and how can you plan for unforeseen circumstances? So I'm going to have you use that chat to kind of think about what are some of those things that we're going to try to address today and plan for today. I know this one's a little complicated because it's kind of a mystery. It could be so many different things. You don't see it. So how can you plan for it? Oh, a car accident. That's one. Health issues. Sometimes people have to go to the hospital unexpectedly. Yeah. Disability, long or short term. Yes. Job loss. Yeah. You don't always see that coming. death. Yeah, hit the nail on the head there. That's kind of what we were trying to get at. And what are some ways that we can plan for some of those circumstances? And if you don't know, it's okay, because we're going to talk about different ways to plan for some of those things that you mentioned already. So emergency fund and savings, yeah. Communicating your wishes ahead of time and clean up your paperwork. Yes, I hate paperwork, but it's so important for these things. Planning ahead with the paperwork, decluttering, also not my favorite task, but very important. So there's lots of ways that we can kind of look at this. We're gonna move ahead, so we can keep this rolling. So some examples of unforeseen circumstances. You guys already kind of hit the nail on the head with these. Death, yours or somebody else's, someone you love or depend on. Incapacitation. And for those of you that don't know, we're going to use the legal definition, which is an incapacitated person may not be able to make or communicate responsible personal decisions. He or she exhibits an inability to meet his or her own personal needs for medical care, nutrition, clothing, shelter, or safety. And if a person cannot make decisions on any of the issues, a general guardian will be appointed. If the person has a disability only in limited areas, then a limited guardian is sufficient, and a minor may not come under the definition of an incapacitated person under certain statutes and is treated separately. So incapacitation could mean a whole lot of different things. You're just unconscious, you're in a coma, you're maybe you're experiencing some mental health issues that are limiting your ability to do activities of daily living or make decisions. Maybe you get sick and your illness prevents you from making certain decisions. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. And then maybe like visiting or living outside the country. And Seisha, you had a really good example of one of your friends, if you wanted to talk about them real quick.
Yeah, one of my really good friends, she is working abroad in Africa. And one of the things that, she still lives here in the United States. She's still a United States citizen, but she, needs her taxes done and all those kind of things. So some of the things we'll talk about later, her mom's able to do that through power of attorney. So we'll talk more about that later, but it's a good thing to have.
So I think, Seisha, you can take over the next slide.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk more about what estate planning is and kind of like where it sits in this whole financial piece, because a lot of times I feel like people don't really know what estate planning is, and we don't talk about it till we're a lot earlier. But definitely we're going to get into it today. So when we talk about estate planning, this is kind of like a quick definition for you. It's the preparation of tasks. So we're getting things put together that serve to manage our asset base. So like our money, our income, our retirement, all that, in the event that we are incapacitated or that we die. So those are the two things that we talk about definitely for estate planning. But basically, it's a preparation of lots of things. So let's talk about more about how estate planning kind of fits into this financial planning piece. So there's lots of different components of financial planning. A lot of times when we do webinars, we talk a lot about goal setting. We talk about SMART goals, that they're specific, measurable, that they're agreed upon, they're realistic, and there's a time setting for it. But financial planning also includes all these other things. So we also have retirement planning, like planning for the future, planning for after you're done working, focusing on that. Risk management is for insurance planning. So your car insurance, your house, even life insurance, long-term disability insurance, those kind of things help us manage those risks when it's too high for us to pay for. Like if our whole house burnt down, like how will we pay for that? That's what risk management is for. When we're talking about financial planning, we also look at this investments piece because, of course, in retirement, we'd like our assets to grow. So we use investments as a way to help further that goal. We also have tax planning. It's kind of self-explanatory because you're doing taxes, but for those who may have a large income, they're looking to see how much they could save with taxes, what kind of things they could do. And then kind of rounding it out as a holistic way is the estate planning. So estate planning, again, we'll talk about documents and tools and considerations you should make later, but this kind of is a holistic way of looking at financial planning in general. This is when you meet with the financial planner, you're going to talk about all these things, even estate planning in that setting. So why estate planning? Why are we talking about it today for young people? So unfortunately, the real fact is that 100% of us die. We're born and then we die. It's just kind of the fact of life. So we wanted to talk about it. Another thing is that 56% of people have not communicated their end-of-life wishes to their loved ones. And we kind of think that's important, especially when, you have certain wishes that you would like to have happen. You need to let those be known to, your spouse, your parents, your siblings, whoever it may be that may be in charge of you in the event that you become incapacitated. And so that's important as well. And then only 27% talk about end-of-life care with their loved ones. Death is an uncomfortable topic. Maybe you're sitting there right now feeling like the heebie-jeebies. But basically, this is an important topic that we do want to talk about. So one thing we'll talk about later is more about wills, but, I'm excited to talk to you guys about all the things that we're doing. So going ahead, I actually experienced this in a very abrupt way. So both my parents have passed, and as a financial educator, I was looking forward to having kind of these conversations with my own family. And so I remember that my dad kind of did all this estate planning wrong, and my mom really did it right. So my dad told me that all of his estate planning was taken care of, that he has a will, and he, the assets are there. There's life insurance. But it turned out when he passed that the will was over 20 years old. My younger sister actually was not even in the will, which was so crazy to me. And then, of course, he created a trust, but it was really created incorrectly, and there weren't enough assets for the trust to be created. So even though I had sat down with my dad numerous times, at least 3 that I can think of, and had a conversation, it wasn't done the way it should have been. And it caused a lot of strife and stress that really took a toll on our family. But my mom did it right. So my mom went to go see an attorney, and she put together some transfers, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, which are basically documents that move like your car, your house from, the deceased person to the next person. But she also updated beneficiaries. And one of the great things that she did, even though she was grieving, she did this while she was grieving. So just some examples of even in the same household, people can get it wrong. And so having an idea of what you want to do can really help. One thing I was talking about with Andrea yesterday that I'd want to share is we wanted to talk to this about with our grandparents, my husband's grandparents. And I really was looking forward to having the conversation. And somebody kind of knocked me down and said, no, you shouldn't be having this conversation, when other family members are around. And because I lost my nerve, we never had that conversation. And unfortunately, my husband's grandmother passed 3 days later. It just was one of the craziest things I've ever experienced. And it really made me realize that having these conversations are very, very important. So we're going to talk about ways to prepare for the unforeseen because they happen. Life happens. All sorts of crazy things happen. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the tools and considerations we're going to be looking at today. So we're definitely going to talk a lot about transfers. That's one of the first things we'll talk about. We'll also talk about wills. We'll talk a little bit about probate, as well as life insurance, funeral planning, and power of attorney. So as we talk about all the different types, again, there's transfers. So transfers are a common way for an asset like a car or a bank account, to be given to a designated person immediately after you die. So you can, for example, you can put a transfer on a car so that when you die, that person can immediately, with a death certificate, go and take care of transferring that car to their name. So these are like kind of the three main transfers that are out there. So the first one is called payable on death. This is typically for bank accounts. You name a person to receive the funds after you've passed. You may have picked this individual when you open the account. So like if you were 16 when you opened your first checking account, you might want to, and you're married now, or, engaged or looking to be engaged, you might want to think about maybe updating that person or people, so that way you give it to the person you want. Transfer on death is another document that you can use with houses or cars or any other assets that need to be transferred from one person to another after you die. Now, let's say you own a house together with your spouse or partner, that house will automatically transfer to the spouse. You don't have to do this document. But if you wanted to give it to like a sibling or, or a parent, you could do that quickly. And then, of course, there's beneficiary designations. The beneficiary designations are typically used for retirement accounts or life insurance. So that way, after you pass, this money is given to you quickly. And Karen has a great question: can you do transfers instead of putting that in a will? And yes, transfers are typically, when the documents are close by, you can do that pretty quickly. Like I had a transfer document on my parents' home, and it was done within like 2 or 3 days. A will sometimes takes a long time because they have to make sure all the assets are there, and sometimes reading a will can take up to 2 to 3 weeks afterwards. So this gets those accounts to that person quickly as soon as you have that death certificate to prove that they've passed. So great question. So let's talk a little bit more. So those are transfers. If you have questions about them, please let me know. But we definitely want to talk about a will. So a will is, from the definition from Merriam-Webster, is the legal declaration of a person's wishes regarding to the disposal of his or her property. So basically a will is made so that way, you tell somebody, these are my wishes, this is the assets I want to transfer, and then they'll be sent to that person. Another thing with wills that I appreciate is that it names guardians for minor children. So if you have a minor child that's yours or that you're responsible for, you can actually name a guardian for that person. Another thing to note, in Illinois, only self-proving wills or testamentary wills are legally valid. So you couldn't do like an oral will, like right before you died, you couldn't say, I want Bob to get all my money. That's not going to work. And just handwriting it doesn't work either. So it has to be typically done in advance. So that's another thing. A lot of questions I get about are, how do I make a will? So there are two types I would think that you could talk about. Is that there's the attorney or online or software. So an attorney, you definitely sit down with them. They get to know you, you get to know them. They kind of know what your wishes are and kind of like what your goals are after you've passed, and kind of get to see what things you want done. And they also store it for you there typically. I would also say that if you're doing it online or with software, it is typically easy to use. It just depends on what website or what software you're using. There are some that are very, very simple. Like I used one yesterday to look at some different wills that took me about 5 minutes to make, or how comprehensive. So if you have a lot of assets, or a lot of children or things that you want done, or very specific things, I would say maybe go see an attorney. But there's also these online or software that you can use that are as good as well. I should also mention that when you make a will, that there has to be 2 witnesses to sign afterwards. So no matter what, you're going to have a paper copy for somebody else to sign. That's what makes it valid in Illinois. And if you don't have those witnesses, you can't have, it won't be valid. It won't be a will that you can contest or talk about. So I have a discussion question. Is a will public or private knowledge? So if I created a will, would everyone get to know about my will or just my like immediate family? It's okay if you don't know, because it's important to talk about. Private until you die, great. Private. Anyone else? So I think it's Susie, I'm not sure, hit it on the head, is that wills are actually public knowledge. So you create it in private, but then once you pass, it becomes public knowledge because it's a part of the probate proceedings. So it's a part of the court proceedings. You can actually look up Elvis Presley's will, which we actually put in there. So if you want to check it out and see the kind of things that he gave his assets to, you can check that out. But this is the one great example that everyone always talks about when they talk about wills, and that they are public knowledge. So kind of just to kind of summarize things about wills, if you create a will, you have to, you can either create it electronically like we talked about, or we could do it with an attorney. It does have to be signed by 2 witnesses, which is what we definitely talked about. Tell everyone where it's stored. So if you have a will and you have a family member that you trust, let them know where that will is so they can find it. I know that when Michael Jackson died, that there were multiple copies of wills and different versions of wills, and that was a big problem. We also wanted to remind you to update for life transitions. So anytime that there's a birth in your family or a death in your family, you definitely want to update that will. I do also quickly just want to let you know that without a will in Illinois, your personal property, like all your stuff and your car and your chairs, or chairs and cars and things like that, plus bank accounts and investments, will actually, if you have a spouse, so if you die without a will, it'll first go to your spouse, and your spouse gets half, and then the children get to split the remaining half. But if you die without family, the state gets everything. There's like some rules about how it goes. It'll go through the court system, but I just want to make that clear that if you die without any family to give any assets to, like, parents, no siblings, it will just go to the state. So next up, we're going to talk about probate. So probate is a court proceeding that you have to go to validate the will.
Seisha, I'm sorry to interrupt. Okay. We had a question about the witnesses that are needed on the will. Do they need to be non-family or non-inheritance, or can they be inheritance?
No, I would say that they have to be non-family. I would say definitely somebody who is not related to you and won't be receiving any kind of inheritance. So if your best friend, Paula, is going to be getting the assets, she probably shouldn't be signing as a witness on your will. Great question.
Very good question.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. So again, probate. Probate is a court proceeding that validates your will. So that just make sure that that your will was valid at the time. Again, those witnesses, like we talked about, and that you were of sound mind when you made it. Most of the time, that's true. And that it helps to distribute the assets according to the will or the state law. While the probate process isn't terrible, it is really long and expensive and can take a long time. I've never heard of a probate process, like a proceeding, go shorter than a year. So it could take up to a year or more to get assets. Something to definitely think about. This is why a lot of people do wills, just to kind of help expedite the process. The will still go through probate, but it will make it faster. That's why we talked about transfers earlier, because those things kind of go automatically. But a will is still a good thing to have. So I'm going to switch this back over to Andrea, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about life insurance.
Thank you, Seisha. So both Seisha and I sold life insurance for a little while before coming here. So, and being financial educators. So that's why I get to do this little piece, because I sold life insurance. But so did Seisha. So if you have questions about life insurance, please use the chat. We'll be answering those questions. So life insurance is a specific type of insurance that pays out to a beneficiary when you die. There are two main types of life insurance. There's whole life insurance and term life insurance. So whole life is typically for, quote, your whole life. So it can be a little more expensive, but you usually purchase a little less insurance and the premium is paid every month. And you can, these are sometimes called burial policies. And you can purchase them on children. As long as you pay the premiums, the insurance will follow you for your entire life. And those premiums will stay the same during the life of the policy, but the older that you are when you purchase the policy, the higher the premium will be throughout the policy. So some people use whole life to both save and insure, but some people prefer to keep their savings or investments and insurance separate. So term life is a good option for that. It's typically for a certain period of time when you may need extra insurance. Some people might buy term insurance after they have a child or after they buy a house. You may buy term insurance maybe after you have other types of life insurance as well, or life transitions as well. Typically, the premiums are lower than whole life, but they can increase depending on the policy. It's usually you purchase it for like 5, 10, 20, or 30 years, but they usually are renewable too. And sometimes this is a cheaper option as well. So definitely look at the pros and cons between whole and term life insurance if you're in the market for that. But I want to ask you, why is purchasing life insurance important, especially when it comes to estate planning? Why do you think that life insurance is important? If you can use the chat, we can kind of address some of those thoughts. Or why do you think is it important at all? Maybe that's something to start with. So most of these webinars are focused on younger people, but we have all ages of people in all different life stages that show up. So why do you think that purchasing life insurance is important, regardless of where you are in your life? So to help cover the costs of death expenses, yeah. Protect your loved ones. It's like all of them popped up at once. If someone, like a family member, is depending on your income, if something happens to you, they have some money to work with, yes. Actually increased my life insurance policy when I got married because I didn't want my husband to have to stress about all the different things that we have going on in our life if something happened to me. So there are lots of different reasons why purchasing life insurance is important. And there's lots of ways to put it in your estate planning process as well. So that's just something to think about. We also have a webinar coming up on March 27th in 2019 about all different types of insurance. So beyond life insurance, we talk about rental insurance and homeowners insurance and car insurance and all kinds of different insurance called Cover Your Assets. But you don't have to wait. We actually have it packaged in a Moodle module online that you can check out and enroll in at the chat. So Kendra put in the chat how you can enroll. You just need to use the code SMMC if you are not a University of Illinois staff or student to log in and enroll in that. So go ahead and check that out after this webinar. But it's definitely a good resource if you're looking at insurance and you're not sure where to start with helping to cover all of your assets. So I'm going to hand it back over to Stacia to talk a little bit about funerals.
Okay. So now we're getting further in all these things that we've talked about already that you can do while you're alive. So a lot of things I read online about for young people is that, we really like to have creative control of our life. And so this is one way that you can do that. So let's talk about the different types of funerals or burials. So the first one is a traditional burial. This is typically involving a casket with a service. There's embalming done, and then there's also lots of fees. It can range anywhere from like $6,000 to $15,000, just depending on where you live and what kind of service, casket, vault you want. Of course, next is traditional cremation, which is done with fire. And so you can also have embalming if you'd like. You don't have to. It's just up to your family or your decision. I've seen it as little as $1,000, but as high as $10,000 for, with a service at whether it's a church or at the funeral home. So another one to consider. New is water cremation. This is not technically necessarily in every state yet. I do know that it is in Illinois, that there is water cremation that is allowed for human remains. But right now, the guesstimate for most of the water cremation is about $1,000 to $3,000. Again, this is without a service or any kind of celebration of life event. There's also green burials, which is kind of making a way in its movement. It's where you are put naturally into the ground. There's no embalming. There's no kind of additives added to you. You just put into the ground. There's usually like a shroud or like a willow basket that's put around the body. And the fees typically come from the maintenance of the site. So that's why it can be as low as $500, but as high as $10,000. And then lastly, if it's something you're interested in, you can donate your body to science. There's generally no cost to this. To you, the family, unless there's a service, like they have a memorial service for you. But the one thing I will say is that the body typically isn't returned, at least for a year or two after you pass, and it's usually cremated. So just something to think about when you're thinking about all these different types of burials. And yes, it's not fun to talk about, but it's something to think about, definitely. So we wanted to ask you, what kind of types of funerals have you experienced? I'll kind of start with mine is that we did, all the burials I've ever seen have been traditional burials with a casket and a service and a vault and then being placed into the ground. I have not experienced a lot of the others. Andrea, I don't know if you want to pop in and talk about your grandpa or not, but.
So my grandpa was cremated, and my aunt came up and helped with like the planning, and she wanted to take the ashes afterwards. So she chose kind of the urn and took the urn with her back to Georgia, where she lives. And it turned out after about a year that she couldn't handle having the ashes in her house. So we ended up having the urn at our house, and we would introduce people that came to visit us to our grandpa, who sat in our living room. So it's I think an untraditional way, and that's probably why I don't have as much of the heebie-jeebies about death, because like we had grandpa's ashes in our living room and we kind of talked about it on a regular basis. But I can definitely see where people are very uncomfortable, especially if they have their own kind of feelings about death, and that just that's my story. I didn't was there anything else that I said yesterday that I was missing, Stacia?
Oh, no, I just wanted you to talk about it. But it does seem to be a lot of cremation or traditional burials I see in here. My sister told me that when she dies, that she wants to be donated to science, and then once we get her ashes back, she wants us to put her in one of those pods to become a tree. And she said this to me more than once now, so I'm pretty sure that's what she wants in her life. I've also seen what I think is kind of cool is you take cremains and you make them into fireworks, and then you kind of you blow up the fireworks. It's kind of one last big bang for your
My
life.
husband has said that he wanted that.
I think I just think it's a really cool thing. But I mean, I know it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but I just think it's so neat. And then I've also seen like beads be made out of cremains, all sorts of other things. So, we could talk all day about this, but we have to keep going and talk about kind of some of our cultural differences. So one of the things I think was, last week was the Day of the Dead, and on the Day of the Dead, they create these beautiful tables filled with pictures of their loved ones, and they kind of remember who their family was and celebrate their life and talk about them. I think that's just so beautiful. In Louisiana, they actually go through and they do like a jazz march, which I think is really cool. And they kind of go through and talk about, they play sad music at first, but then they kind of shift to like more upbeat music, and they kind of just remember their lives. Another thing that Andrea and I saw that we thought was kind of cool was in Ghana, they make fantasy coffins. So in Ghana, people aspire to be buried in coffins that represent their work or something that they loved. So we wanted to give you an example of owls. I think that's kind of cool. Some of the things we saw were like corn and fish and boats. They're just really, really neat to see like these people, like their last ride is in this beautiful fantasy coffin. So, things in other countries are very, very different. Like in other countries that they don't wear black, they wear white instead, or, green or purple. It's just kind of interesting to see how things are different. So as we're talking about cultural differences, we also start to think about like, what kind of things do you want? Some ceremonies also kind of depend on the burial type. I'll have Andrea kind of talk here in a minute about her husband, Luke, but I personally want like a taco party. I want tacos. I want a taco bar. I want all the fixings. I want all sorts of salsa. I want tequila. Like, this is what I want when I die. I want everyone to have a big party and just like celebrate my life. Earlier, like I said, talked about my sister. She really wants to be made into a tree. So you kind of have to start to think about like, what kind of things do you want?
I think your taco bar party really resonates with me since I had a pizza party for my wedding. So if you go before me, Seisha, I want to come to your taco bar ceremony.
Please do. Please, like, eat all the tacos.
So if you want to share in the chat what you're comfortable talking about, what you want. My husband created a music mix. He mixed his own funeral music when he was, I don't know, in 2011. He told me it was the first time that he made a mix, and he updates it almost every year so that it's the most updated version. And he's actually created 3 different links of mixes so that no matter what the needs of the funeral ceremony is or what the family wants when he goes, there will be an option for them to use. Usually his family does like a slideshow, so he wants to make sure that nobody else is mixing his music because he wants that creative control over the music. I don't think he cares about anything else, but definitely the music at his ceremony.
I love that. And somebody else wrote about they've seen cremains be made into diamonds or jewelry, which I've seen as well. We were reading about in Korea, actually, there's a time limit for graves, which is, I think it's kind of strange, but whatever. You can only be in a grave for about 60 years, and then they'll take the remains and make them into beads, colorful beads. So that's kind of cool. Kathy says she thinks a picnic or a barbecue would be friends. I think that's just so fat. Like, and Shannon said that she made her own funeral music mix too. So this isn't uncommon to think about. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but these are kind of the things that we talk about all the time. So,
well, and I think maybe we think about it, right? But we don't necessarily talk about it with our family.
I agree.
And that's the important piece. If nobody knows what you want, then it's not going to happen.
Like, if you don't know where Luke's music is, he's going to be really mad. Like,
yeah, he'll probably haunt me.
I mean, I wouldn't blame him if he made his own music mix and he didn't use it. So,
So that's, I'm going to have to make sure that it's saved multiple places in multiple different formats as we age, since our file types change too.
oh yeah, that's true. Good point, Andrea. So moving forward, so we talked a lot about kind of the things that you want. We're next talking about power of attorney. This is a really, really important thing to have while you're living, because power of attorney actually ceases when you die. So there are two types of power of attorney in healthcare that we talk about a lot. The first is healthcare. This one is a really easy form to do. We've actually thrown the links in the chat. So with healthcare, obviously you are designating someone that you trust to make decisions on your behalf in the event that you become incapacitated or just are unable to make those decisions. So with healthcare, this can be done before like a surgery or any kind of illness or after an illness diagnosis, and it must be signed by 2 witnesses to be valid in Illinois. Again, probably non-familial people who are not related to you. I did a power of attorney for healthcare before my baby was born, and I had my secretaries in the office sign it for me. Quick, easy, done. Takes less than 10 minutes, as long as you understand you're giving healthcare power of attorney to that person. And then, of course, there's property. So this is, while it says property, it really means all sorts of assets, financial assets. I would say that with property, you should look over a little bit more in depth, because there are a lot of things that can be done with a property power of attorney, from like just paying simple bills to like selling off your retirement accounts or your stock accounts or your house. So some things to definitely think about. So those are 2 great power of attorneys to talk about, and they are really for everyone. So if you don't have one, seriously consider getting one. Healthcare is really easy to do. Again, 2 witnesses, but the property power of attorney must have a notary. Just saying, for it to be valid. So just one good caveat. And then actually, Kathy wrote a really great blog post about power of attorney, which we'll throw in the chat here as well.
So there is a question about, can a power of attorney sign a FAFSA app? And Kathy did respond that if you have a power of attorney for property for someone and that person would be the person to sign the FAFSA, then yes. However, if let's say it's a parent who's unable to sign the FAFSA, there are documents that a student or a FAFSA applicant can actually submit to FAFSA, explaining why they cannot have their custodial parent or their guardian or whoever that needs to sign it as a parent submit their documentation or sign the app. So there are different ways to get around that besides using power of attorney, just in case there's a concern there, especially for FAFSA specifically.
Thank you, Andrea.
Yeah.
So yeah, lastly, we just want to talk about some kind of, I will finish up with talking about considerations that you should keep in mind, is that, these are some things that you should be thinking of when you are putting these documents together. Do you have minor children or children that you want to give assets to? Of course, then we talk about assets, house, cars, life insurance, retirement accounts, those kind of things. Who are those going to go to? Can those be done with a beneficiary or a transfer document? Or do they need to go through a will? Or do they need to be through some other things? Another consideration we wanted to talk about was pets. Andrea and I are very big pet lovers. Andrea loves her dog. I love my cats. Yet we're still friends, so that's a good thing. But, pets are another thing that we don't kind of talk about. You hear sad stories about an owner died and the cat was returned to a shelter, or the dog was returned to a shelter. So we just want you to think about, if you were to pass, where would the pet go? And maybe kind of make some arrangements for that pet in advance. Maybe you decide that the dog's going to go to the family friend and you're going to give them a little bit of money to help out with their expenses. those kind of things can help kind of keep pets in a loving, safe home instead of in a shelter, which we know could happen. And then lastly, social media is a really big thing. Millennials are kind of social media kings, and we want to make sure that when you pass, like they have access to what you want done with your social media. Like, do you want your Facebook to go away? Do you want all your Instagram photos on the internet till the end of time? So when your ancestors, like 50 years from now, can see all your silly, goofy duck faces, whatever it is, just be, mindful of what kind of things you want done. Because there's a lot here to talk about, but I'm going to shift it over to Andrea about how to have the conversation.
Thank you, Seisha. So today is actually my dog's birthday, who's pictured here. This is Unity. She is 7 today. So it's probably a good time for us as a family to think about what we want in our will and how to have that conversation. So that's what we're going to talk about. I think that it's important to recognize and acknowledge that talking about money itself is difficult. So talking about death is even more difficult, especially for Americans. Seisha and I were talking a lot about this the last few days, about how challenging it is, especially for Americans in similar cultures to America, to talk about death or end-of-life care in general. You want to make sure that you're having this conversation before you're in a crisis or before your family's in a crisis. So we're going to talk about a few ways to do that. So we're looking at all the different life stages. Okay, this is a very abbreviated version of life stages. There's lots of different versions, whether you're looking into psychology or financial planning. But in general, you might have infancy, early childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, middle adulthood, and later adulthood. Those little boxes at the bottom, early, middle, later adulthood, is the majority of our life, but we spend the most attention probably on infancy, early childhood, and adolescence. We don't really pay a lot of attention to the stuff that happens in later adulthood unless it's in crisis. And we want to try to avoid that by having those kinds of conversations now and spending a little time with attention on those things. So a few tips for you to use when you're thinking about how to have this or starting to have these conversations is you can start by using somebody else's story. You can say like, Aretha Franklin went this way, or Prince went this way, or you might talk about other stories. Maybe someone close to you died recently, and that's kind of an instigation to have those conversations with the people that you care about. You might consider writing yourself a letter first, or even the person that you want to talk to kind of get your thoughts out and organize, so it's easier to have that conversation when you do have to have that conversation. You might consider using some of our culture, like our popular culture, right? Maybe some movies or books or websites to help you as you prepare. You might consider practicing that conversation with a friend that you trust. And remember that it's not one and done. You're not going to have this conversation and never have it again. It's a series of conversations because our lives change. Our wishes might be influenced by new things. Our relationships change. So the assets, obviously, as we grow wealth, we have different assets. So it's a continual kind of conversation to have. It's really important. So Seisha introduced me to this kit that you can use to get you started. I haven't delved into it super in depth, but I started looking at it this week, and it's really awesome. It can be used to start difficult conversations, or start thinking about these difficult kinds of conversations. It has some scales to help you rate your own feelings about different situations. It has a document for writing down your thoughts. You can identify some of what your conversation priorities are, and even a few tips on how to break the ice, because it is a challenging kind of thing to have. We do want to recognize that this isn't an easy conversation to have, but it could be a great opportunity for you to think about having this discussion with your parents or your grandparents if you're young. And even if you're young, maybe it's about your own wishes. And maybe it's another type of conversation where you're older and you're trying to have this conversation with your child or your cousin who's a little bit younger than you about what their wishes are. So I think that's important to think about. It's not just a one-way conversation either. It's kind of a sharing conversation, but it is kind of challenging. I'm going to hand it back over to Seisha to summarize things up.
Thanks, Andrea. So just kind of to summarize, estate planning is an important part of financial planning. We kind of looked at that holistically earlier, like what does estate plan or financial planning kind of look like? And estate planning is definitely a part of that piece. We use estate planning to make documents to kind of outline our wishes in the event that something does happen, because unfortunately it's going to. We kind of do know that. We talked about several tools. We talked about transfers, those payable on death, a transfer, and those beneficiaries. We talked about wills, using an attorney, or kind of going online and using software, or just even online forms. And then we talked about power of attorney, that property, that financial piece, and then that healthcare piece as well. So just a quick reminder for wills and power of attorney, you do need to have witnesses for both, and for power of attorney, for property to be valid in Illinois, you must have a notary sign it as well. And then, of course, like we talked about towards the end, start thinking about what your wishes are. Maybe you don't really like tacos as much as I do. That's okay. Maybe you're really more into burgers, or I don't know, spaghetti. And you can have that wish or discussion with your loved one about you rather have a pizza party, like Andrea talked about. Like those kind of things kind of help get some of these uncomfortable conversations going, and maybe that's a good way to start the discussion. We hope that you learned a lot today. I'm going to let Andrea talk more about our badges program, but there's that.
Thank you, Seisha. So one thing that I forgot to mention earlier when I was describing the laundry list of things that I get to do is I, with my team, run a financial literacy digital badges program. So you can earn up to 5 digital badges through our program. There's one on earning, protecting, saving, spending, and borrowing. And this particular webinar is a Protect Badge eligible event. If you complete this quiz that we're going to put in the chat, you can get entered for this particular program. You have to complete 3 badge eligible activities in order to earn the badge, but you can put that badge on LinkedIn or your online portfolio and show it to everyone in the world. Or if you want to just keep it for yourself, that's fine too. We do know that more and more employers are looking at financial stability as a measure of productivity in the workplace. And this is just another means to help you kind of show your financial prowess to others, be it an employer or your best friend, and it's a competition and you have all the badges. So go ahead and earn those badges and start with that quiz. Our next webinar is on December 7th, and it is What's Your Job Worth? So we're going to talk about job benefits and what to consider when you're looking at different offers. We're going to be talking about insurance available through an employer, like health insurance, group life insurance, sometimes pet insurance. Like someone just told me a couple days ago that they got a job offer and pet insurance was on their benefits package, which was kind of interesting, especially as we shift to a society that has like dogs on Instagram or cat memes as a big part of our culture. So I think that's an interesting shift in employer recognition of what the priorities are in our culture too. So we're going to be talking about all those different things, not just salary, but all those other fringe benefits that you want to consider and what those values are and how they fit into your financial plan as well. We are also on all kinds of social media, both University of Illinois Extension and North Park University and University of Illinois Student Money Management Center, yours truly. We are going to put some information in the chat on how to find us on all those different social media sites. So go ahead and use that and follow us and tweet at us and all kinds, like our stuff. Yeah. So if you do have questions, we're going to stay on for a little while and make sure that we get those all answered, but don't feel like you're obligated to stay on with us. I know if you have things to do, places to go ahead and do that. But we will be stopping the recording, and we'll make that available later once everything is put together in Moodle. So thanks so much for joining us.